Hello everybody. In today's video, we're going to be talking about a subject that helps to explain this question. What do the following words have in common? Take a look. Do you know? All right, maybe you figured it out, maybe you haven't. If you want another minute, pause the video and keep thinking about it. The answer is all of these words have entered the English language through Arabic. And in fact, these are all essentially just borrowed Arabic words. Algebra, candy, coffee. These are all words that entered the English language from Arabic. And many of these words were first developed or first emerged during the Middle Ages in what is known as the Islamic Golden Age, a time period of incredible prosperity and technological and cultural advancement that we're going to be looking at today. The importance of trade in the Middle East during this time period helps to explain why certain basic commodities like cotton and coffee began as simply borrowed words in English and in other European languages as well. So we're going to be looking today at the roots of the Islamic cultural golden age and thinking about what it is that causes cultures to go through these high points of development. So yes, that's going to be our topic. Take a moment to appreciate this amazing geometrically symmetrical fractal-esque mosque. This is in Cordoba, Spain, which was during the Middle Ages controlled by an emirate, a offshoot of the Umayyad Caliphate, which conquered Spain back in the 700s AD. So here are some of the things we're going to be looking at. There's two big questions that I want you to take away from the video today. One is, what factors led to the emergence of the Islamic Golden Age under the Abassid Caliphate? Think about these golden ages almost as like some sort of special kind of historical pie. What ingredients do you need to add to get a cultural golden age? Could we maybe have another cultural golden age? Maybe we're going through one right now. And second, I also want you to think about how contact between Europe and the Middle East helped to influence European cultural development. And then there's all these vocab words that I'll talk about as we go. So let's start with some basic geography. This is very simple, but I just want to make sure you guys know where we're talking about. So here, I apologize for the graininess of this image. So the Mediterranean Sea is up here. The Mediterranean Sea is a crucial trade route that links Europe with the Middle East. During this time period, during the Middle Ages, the Mediterranean is going to emerge as kind of a dividing line between Christianity and Islam, as Islam spreads through North Africa and the Middle East, but not very far into Europe. Down here we have the Sahara Desert, which is the world's largest desert, or at least the world's largest hot desert. Antarctica and the Arctic are both also deserts, but it's the hottest traditional, or the biggest traditional desert that you would think of, sand, heat, stuff like that. This is going to act as a barrier during the initial spread of Islam, but Islam will actually spread south through the Sahara because of trade routes that we'll talk about in later videos. And then here we have the Arabian Peninsula, also a very dry environment. The Arabian Peninsula is where Islam is going to begin, and it's sort of going to explode out of the Arabian Peninsula and expand east into Persia and Central Asia. It's going to expand west across North Africa and northward into Mesopotamia and Anatolia, that is modern-day Turkey. So this is the area we're going to be looking at for today, and we're going to now move on to look at the origins of Islam. So Islam was founded by a guy named Muhammad, who's probably up there with a couple other folks as like the most historically impactful individual ever in history. he was a caravan trader from the Arabian city of Mecca, which is right around here near the Red Sea. So Muhammad spent his early life moving around the Arabian Peninsula, trading and transporting goods through the Arabian desert. Um, he when he was 40 years old, he received his first revelation from God. He was on a sort of like silent meditation retreat, which he would go on regularly by himself up to the hills around Mecca. And there he claims that the angel Gabriel, the same angel who announced to the Virgin Mary that she was pregnant with baby Jesus, this same angel, God's messenger, came down to him and began to speak to him God's message. And Muhammad remembered all of it. Muhammad then went back to Mecca and began telling people what the angel Gabriel had told him. This was not popular, however, in Mecca. Mecca was currently home to a sort of polytheistic religion that worshipped a whole bunch of different gods, and they did not like some of the basic ideas that Muhammad was putting forward, specifically that there was only one God, the God mentioned in the Hebrew and Christian holy books, the one universal God who created everything and who doesn't want you to worship a bunch of other gods. So when Muhammad went back to Mecca and told them all that their gods were fake, they kicked him out of town, and he was forced to flee Mecca along with his followers to another city named Medina. However, Muhammad was a charismatic leader, and his ideas were quite popular. And so Islam began to spread from Medina to the rest of Arabia. And eventually, Muhammad was able to muster enough support so that he was able to actually conquer Mecca by 629. And at the time of his death in 632, most of the Arabian Peninsula had been conquered by his followers in the name of Islam. There aren't a lot of cool pictures of like the angel talking to Muhammad or any of this other stuff, and the reason for that is because Islam avoids images of God or the divine, and because Muhammad is so closely associated with the divine, they also generally avoid painting pictures of Muhammad, and so instead I've included a bit of Arabic calligraphy for Muhammad's name. So after Muhammad's death, we see one of the most rapid conquests in human history unfold. Within about 100 years, Arabic armies expand outward. One thing that's worth noting is that the Arabs were a nomadic pastoralist people, a little bit like the Mongols in that many of them were nomadic, many of them specialized in riding horses or, in some cases, camels. The camels gave the Arabs an incredible battlefield advantage because horses are generally terrified of camels, especially horses who are not used to interacting with camels. And so this combined with high levels of morale because of their belief in, that God was on their side, combined with a number of other factors, allowed the armies from Mecca and Medina to expand rapidly and to conquer all of Persia, huge parts of the Middle East, which had been controlled by the Byzantine Empire, the empire formerly known as the Roman Empire, and to expand along the coast of North Africa all the way up into Spain. They even expanded into what is modern-day France, but were then defeated by an army of Germanic warriors known as the Franks. Within basically 100 years, Islam explodes outward. It was over a 200-day journey from, if you wanted to travel on land, from the Atlantic coast all the way to the eastern stretches of Islam, which we're getting into, was approaching India. Islam would continue to expand after this, but instead of expanding by conquest, it would expand through trade and cultural assimilation as people interacted with these wealthy Middle Eastern civilizations. Another thing that helped to explain the expansion of Islam and these conquests is that the early Arabic armies were actually very religiously tolerant, and many groups of Jews and Christians living throughout North Africa and the Middle East were actually welcomed the Arab armies because they believed life would be better for them under the Arab conquerors who were promising religious toleration than under the Roman or the Persian empires, which were quite religiously intolerant. So so that's the early expansion of Islam. After this early expansion, the early governments sort of collapsed, like they kind of expanded too quickly. But what emerges in their place is one of the greatest political entities of all time, the Abassid Caliphate. The Abassid Caliphate lasts for about 500 years, but its real kind of like heyday is the first half, from 750 to 1000. And this time period from around 750 to 1000 is often referred to as a cultural golden age. And there's a number of factors within the Abbasid Caliphate that help to explain why this was such an amazing time period. And I'm going to go over them for you. So first of all, the Abbasid Caliphate was very culturally diverse, but it was also unified by Islam. So there were lots of different ethnic groups, but they all could relate to each other and viewed each other as equals and brothers, because under Islam, everybody was equal before God. So Africans, Arabians, Middle Easterners, Turks, Persians, everybody who embraced Islam could come in and be viewed as an equal within the Abbasid Caliphate, which allowed for a huge influx of ideas and for a mixing of people and perspectives within the Abbasid Caliphate. The three major groups were the Arabs, the Turks, and the Persians, and they would all play a major role in Abbasid Caliphate culture and politics. Another thing that's interesting is that the Abbasid Caliphate was highly tolerant of other religious and cultural traditions. In fact, much more so than contemporary Christian groups. There was a concept within Islam known as the people of the book, and this referred to Jews and Christians. And they were called the people of the book because they had the Torah or the Bible. And Islam believed that the Torah and the Bible were largely true documents, but that they just weren't perfect, and that the Quran, which was the Islamic holy book, was essentially like the final patch. It was the updated and perfect version, but that the Bible and the Torah weren't bad. And it's important to remember that Islam, in spite of all of its conflicts over the years with Christianity, believes in the same God, believes in Jesus Christ, and the Virgin Mary, and all of that stuff. They just disagree on some details. Like, for example, Islam doesn't believe that Jesus is the Son of God, but rather just another prophet like Muhammad who brought God's message to earth. And so, so they're very tolerant of other religious traditions, which allows for the spread of ideas. There's still Jewish and Christian scholars working within the Abbasid Caliphate and spreading their ideas as well. The Abbasid Caliphate was also interested in Indian and ancient Greek ideas. So they were able to bring together tons of different ideas from different cultures and to combine them to come up with new ideas. The Abbasid Caliphate was very much in favor of trade. After all, Muhammad was himself a trader. And so the Abbasid Caliphate encouraged trade, and they also allowed for the establishment of early systems of banking and a system of credit where you could acquire a loan to make a business deal happen if you were short on cash. among lots of other things. The Abbasid Caliphate provided support for education and scholarship. Uh, Throughout the Abbasid Caliphate, there were special universities known as madrasas, where young men could go to study the Quran and also to master master their Arabic and to learn other languages and history and stuff like that. So there was basically a state-sponsored system of higher education within the Abbasid Caliphate. There was also the world's largest library, known as the House of Wisdom, which we'll talk more about in a minute, that was funded by the Abbasid Caliphate. And all of this together allows for the creation of a highly educated, wealthy, and diverse society. The Abbasid Caliphate is in many ways at the middle of the medieval world. So here's the borders of the Abbasid Caliphate here. And then the red lines show trade routes. So you've got trade routes going up into Europe, trade routes going down into sub-Saharan Africa, trade routes connecting to India and China, trade routes going up into Mongolia. And all of these trade routes crisscross here in Baghdad, which was the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. So the Abbasid Caliphate is in many ways bringing together all of the different cultural ideas, all of the different commodities of the world into a single central location and mixing it all together and producing huge amounts of wealth. And it seems almost obvious that if you do this, you're going to get a whole bunch of new cool ideas as people and goods and ideas mix together in the markets of the Abbasid Caliphate. One of the most obvious reasons for why the Abbasid Caliphate goes through this remarkable period of cultural flourishing is their support for high-level scholarship. And the most obvious example of that is the House of Wisdom. So this was founded by the Caliph al-Ma'mun in the early 800s. Caliph, by the way, guys, is just the name for the leader of the Abbasid Caliphate, and the Caliph was viewed not just as the leader of the empire, but also as the global leader of Islam. And so this gave the leader of the Abbasid Caliphate not only a lot of political power, but also a lot of religious authority. And when he passed a law, it wasn't just a law, it was also like God's law. So in some ways, this status as caliph is similar to what we saw in China with the idea of the mandate of heaven, that the guy who's in charge is somehow linked to a larger causal order. And in this case, it's the will of God. But so anyway, the Caliph al-Ma'mun in the early 800s founds the House of Wisdom using government money. So this is tax money being spent on high-level scholarship. And one of the main things that happens in the House of Wisdom is that they seek out and collect texts from all over the world and translate all of them into Arabic. So you have texts from ancient Greece, texts from Persia, texts from India, from China. You see Buddhist texts, you see Greek pagan texts. All of these ideas are being translated together. And one reason why the Abbasid Caliphate is so tolerant of these different traditions is they believe that God is all-powerful. So therefore, God must have wanted all of these people all around the world to write these books, and that these books must all in some way be an expression of God's power and God's ideas. And what they're trying to do in the House of Wisdom is they're trying to take all of the different ideas from all throughout history and combine them into a more perfect understanding of God's creation, which I think is a pretty cool way to think about it. Anyway, by around the year 1000, the House of Wisdom had become what it was almost certainly the world's largest collection of books. And they covered all sorts of different topics, which we'll look at a little bit more in a minute. And it lasted until around 1258 when it was destroyed by the Mongols who conquered Baghdad. The Mongols, one person describing the destruction of the House of Wisdom says that the Tigris River, which flowed through Baghdad, ran black with the ink of books as the Mongols simply threw huge numbers of them into the Tigris. I don't know if this is true. That would be a lot of work to throw like millions of books into the river. Um, it'd be much easier just to burn it because it would be a wooden structure with a bunch of paper inside of it. But either way, I'll never forgive the Mongols for this. Huge numbers of irreplaceable philosophical texts were destroyed, and we'll never get them back. But so anyway, as a result of all of this, you get a cultural golden age. And you see a number of really incredible breakthroughs happen during this time period, about 1,000 years ago. So in the fields of mathematics, scholars in the Abassid Caliphate make a number of major breakthroughs. Most importantly, they basically invent algebra, which you guys are all very familiar with. They also come up with the idea of an algorithm. Is that right? I don't know how to spell algorithm. Oh my God, don't laugh at me. Okay, an algorithm which might turn out to be one of the most important ideas ever because that's basically how computers work. In the field of medicine, they study human anatomy, and using their studies in human anatomy, they come up with new surgical techniques that are much less likely to kill the patient. In the field of astronomy, they develop systems for coming up with precise astronomical measurements, and they also debate a number of very important and advanced ideas, including whether or not the Earth rotates on an axis, which it does. And many of these ideas in Middle Eastern astronomy will later be transferred over to Europe, and Europeans will use these ideas to take the field even further. In the field of philosophy, they combine Greek, Indian, and Islamic ideas together to come up with powerful philosophical systems. And in the field of chemistry, which they called alchemy, they make a number of important breakthroughs. They discover sugar by refining sugar cane juice down into the crystals. They discover alcohol by distilling wine down into its pure alcohol out of wine. And they also discover the chemical process of distillation, which is super useful, not just for alcohol, but also for other stuff like perfumes and whatnot. And so all of this happens because of there's a lot of money going into these fields of research and ideas from all over the world coming together. One last thing I want to talk about here at the end is the impact of the Islamic caliphates on Christian Europe. So European rulers viewed Islam as a bad thing that needed to go away. They viewed it as a heresy. A heresy, of course, well, you might not know what it means, but heresy is when somebody incorrectly interprets a religious idea. And the Christians believed that Islam was a fake offshoot of Christianity, and that Muhammad had basically made up all of his ideas. And they wanted to get rid of Islam and replace it with Christianity. And we see this a number of times in which Europe launches more or less unprovoked attacks against the Islamic world. Although you could argue that the Islamic conquests of parts of the Roman Empire were themselves unprovoked. So whatever. In the Middle Ages, we see the Crusades, in which Western European kings send over armies into the Middle East in an attempt to reconquer the Holy Lands and restore Christian kingdoms there. These crusades, in spite of enjoying some initial success, are all failures. The Reconquista, which is basically just another crusade going on in Spain, happens over the course of 700 years, and this one is successful. The kingdoms of northern Spain, which are Christian, are able to slowly push back the Islamic empires that control other parts of Spain. And by 1492, the Christian kings of Spain are able to reconquer the entire peninsula. It's not a coincidence that Columbus's voyage happens in 1492, right as the Reconquista is finishing up, as Spanish monarchs are looking for ways to invest all of the money that they get from conquering these wealthy Islamic territories. Now, even though Europe is very much hostile toward Islam throughout the Middle Ages, Europe actually benefits greatly because of their contact with Islamic civilization. For example, Greek philosophy, which lies at the basis of modern science, had basically died out in Europe because of the Catholic Church and their desire to get rid of non-Christian ideas. Many of the great Greek philosophers were completely unknown in Europe until the texts were reintroduced by Islamic scholars talking to Christian scholars in Spain. And the works of Aristotle, for example, were able to re-enter Europe through Islamic Spain. Various breakthroughs in mathematics were just copied wholesale. You might have even heard some people refer to our current numerical system of digits and decimal points as Arabic numerals. This numeral system was actually taken from India, but Europeans got it from the Middle East, so they called them Arabic numerals. The concept of zero, which is crucial to the decimal system, is also an Arabic word. Various breakthroughs in navigational technology that were connected to astronomy were copied wholesale from Arabic or Abassid era breakthroughs, and various trade goods that helped to fund the Italian Renaissance. Stuff like spices, sugar, and cotton were all obtained through trade with the Middle East. So it's kind of ironic that Europeans viewed Islam as bad and backwards, but in fact, many of the most important technological and cultural breakthroughs that allowed Europe to go on and explore the world and eventually conquer large parts of the world were in fact borrowed from the people who they viewed as their enemy. So I find that just to be kind of a delicious irony within world history. And I think it's something that needs to be acknowledged. So anyway, here are the video goals. Hopefully you can answer all of these now. I realized that I didn't explicitly mention the Quran. That's just the holy book, which is based on the sayings of Muhammad, and which, according to Muhammad, come directly from the angel Gabriel. And then the Caliph, I mentioned, is the leader of not just the Islamic Empire, but also all of Islam, and that the Caliphate is just the empire that is ruled by the Caliph. Oh gosh, I might have also left out the concept of Dar al-Islam. This is the idea that it was more or less okay for people from within the Arabic Empire or the early caliphates to conquer non-Islamic people, but that it was not okay for people within the world of Islam to fight each other. Dar al-Islam means the world of Islam or the world of peace. And so the idea was it was okay to conquer non-Islamic territory, but once some territory was ruled by an Islamic ruler, you were not allowed to go to war with them. And this was used to justify expansion during that first 100-year period. Sorry for skipping those terms. Hope that wasn't too stressful. Anyway, that's your video for today. There are guided notes, and so you can go ahead and find. Well, I guess if you're watching this video, you already know there's guided notes. So I'm just going to stop talking now. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.